Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. It is a spectacular day here in Providence, Rhode Island, but we're going to head right down to the University of Virginia. We've got Jennifer Lawless. She's the chair of the Political Science Department at Jefferson's University. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to join you.
Do you still call it Jefferson's University, or is that just me being old school?
No, people still do.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
He deserves a little credit. School's pretty nice.
Well, he's a flawed man.
Aren't we all? Let's jump to it. Speaking of flawed men, Hunter Biden gets convicted this week. He is convicted of 3 federal charges. Let's go through the ramifications of it. Sorry to hear it for Hunter Biden, but it does sort of reinforce the rule of law that the Biden Justice Department convicted the president's son, a sort of monumental event of committing federal crimes. The president's son did not get a free pass on this one.
And not only did the president's son not get a free pass on this one, but the general consensus out there is that had Hunter Biden been named anything else, it would not have gone the way that it went. And he was actually held to a higher standard because he's a Biden. And so I think not only was it a victory for the rule of law, but as horrible as it might be for Joe Biden as a father, it was the best possible outcome for Joe Biden as a presidential candidate, because it's able to sort of take the wind out of the sails of the Republicans' argument that the Biden Justice Department is only targeting Republicans, only targeting Donald Trump, and only going after their own political enemies. That argument falls flat when the president's own son is convicted by the Biden Justice Department, and the president has said that he will not pardon him.
But does that even up from when it was Senator Biden and Hunter got caught in Delaware drinking beers during high school?
I think this is a little bit more significant. The other thing that I would say too is it bothers me that we're equating Donald Trump's actions and the fact that he was convicted of 34, federal crimes with the son of Joe Biden's actions.
State crimes.
I'm sorry? State crimes.
Yeah.
Yes, he'll be convicted of the federal crimes later. And we're equating that with Joe Biden's son's behavior. These are not the same thing. Now, the extent to which the 2 presidential candidates believe in the rule of law and are willing to uphold it shine through based on these 2 cases. But it's important to remember that Joe Biden hasn't been accused, indicted, or convicted of anything.
Okay, let's go down the road. Donald Trump had to do a call with his potentially his parole officer, or I guess it will be his parole officer one way or the other, unless he has an appeal that's successful. But let's follow that along. We are just in places we never thought we'd be. Maybe we thought during the Nixon era, where there was a real chance that a sitting president could be prosecuted, but we really are in a place that we've never been before. Are we running a risk that the American people are becoming immune to the information about crimes by presidents, their families, etc.?
Well, I don't think they're becoming immune. I think Donald Trump, starting pretty much in 2015, set up the expectation that his political enemies were out to get him and they were going to stop at no cost. And as a result, all of the crimes that he's committed, all of the actions that he's taken that sort of fly in the face of the way politics and the criminal justice system have previously operated, American voters were sort of primed to expect. And so we often say that Joe Biden is terrible when it comes to communication. Donald Trump, it's hard to imagine somebody better when it comes to communicating his message and, communicating years in advance what he anticipates could be the fallout of some of his actions. And so I don't know that it's immune. I think it's all part of Donald Trump's plan to, render the Justice Department, as long as it's under his control, and the criminal justice system almost moot.
Americans have always sort of tried to balance sort of the, regalness of the presidency with sort of a more grassroots American realism. Everybody heading over to Andrew Jackson's White House for a big party. American presidents got embarrassed in the legal matters by things like Billy Carter and his side gig as a beer manufacturer, or Roger Clinton doing silly things. We've really, though, pushed the envelope to, the president's son convicted of felonies, the former president convicted of felonies.
Well, again, I just want to highlight, we're not judged by the company we keep, and the president's son is in his 50s. I mean, at some point, I don't think that we should be holding our elected officials responsible for their children's actions when those actions are committed by their children as adults, and they, as the president or as other elected leaders, are not doing anything to intervene or compromise the investigation and the trial and the punishment. And so I really think that we're talking about apples and oranges. Now, the other thing that I would note is, it has gotten to the point where, I think in part because of the 24-hour news cycle and social media and the fact that the political system seems more and more open to unconventional candidates, that we're becoming more accustomed to seeing bad behavior. I remember when George W. Bush was president and his two daughters were in college at the time, and they went out and drank one night, and Jenna and Tonic was the front page of the Post headline, and it was this really, really salacious, scandalous thing. That's insane to think that anybody would care right now. But
Amy,
again,
just for the record, Amy Carter's car was booted when she was an undergrad at Brown University for not paying her parking tickets. I believe that might have made its way to the New York Post as well.
yeah, I mean, and I think the question becomes, does that mean that Jimmy Carter is fundamentally flawed as a parent? Does that mean that George W. Bush is fundamentally flawed as a parent? And their kids were in college at the time. I don't think that, people can blame Joe Biden for Hunter Biden's problems. The other thing I would note is that what complicates this situation in particular is that Americans in general have all dealt with, almost everybody has dealt with or knows somebody who has dealt with addiction and drugs and figuring out how to have a recovery that's lasting. I mean, there's a degree of empathy associated with these charges that I think will not be associated with, the tax evasion charges and the, paperwork fraud that we're going to see in September in California.
Okay, let's go to the Supreme Court. It's been a wild week, 2 weeks. A lot of information has come out about billionaires funding members of the Supreme Court with mammoth amounts of gifts, millions of dollars worth of gifts. In the case of Clarence Thomas, he's received more in gifts from third parties than he's actually earned in the Supreme Court over the same period of time. I think that's the numbers that balance out. And moreover, the decisions coming out of the Supreme Court are sometimes mind-numbing. They did reaffirm the use of the so-called abortion pill on a 9-0 vote, and then today took legislation that had been adopted during the Trump era on banning bump stocks for guns and some other aspects of trying to control high velocity, high magazine type of guns, and overturn that ban on a 6-3 vote. What's going on, and is that sort of last institution that we had some confidence in now being completely eroded?
That confidence has been eroded over time, and the last couple of years in particular have really highlighted that. From the time that the memo was leaked regarding the Dobbs decision, then the fact that the Supreme Court themselves are reluctant to adopt any kind of ethics rules, that when they did adopt these rules, it's unclear who gets to enforce them. I mean, it sort of highlights to most voters that the same problems that they have with all of our other political institutions, they also have with the court. In terms of these recent decisions, I'd say a couple of things. The first is the mifepristone decision, or the abortion drug decision, is not, I mean, it's obviously good news for the pro-choice side in that the drug is allowed to remain on the market. But what the decision actually does is provide a recipe to take it off the market, right? They're basically saying, look, there was no standing in this case. The people who brought the case didn't have the right to do so, but here are the kinds of people who would. And so my hunch is that this is in no way a done deal. And I think that there are currently 14 states that have laws on the books. That might not be an accurate number, but there are several states that have laws on the books that are well situated to now put forward a different challenge with, somebody that might have standing in the court, might agree to hear it, and then ultimately ban it. As far as the bump stocks are concerned, this is one of the only times that Democrats and Republicans came together. It was a Trump ban to limit a you know, a gun, a piece of, a gun legislation that nobody thought was a good idea, right? Like, there's no reason to have bump stocks. You don't need to be able to fire 100 bullets in a matter of seconds. And both sides agreed to this. It was seen as this monumental bipartisan compromise. The Democrats didn't get as much as they wanted, but the Republicans were willing to come on board after the mass shooting in 2017. For the court to strike that down, I think it just demonstrates how out of touch they really are.
Will we see reform? Are we headed to, not today, not tomorrow, but in the next 5, 10 years, a constitutional amendment to reform the Supreme Court, i.e., maybe limit their terms? Secondly, create some accountability for Supreme Court justices.
Passing a constitutional amendment is almost impossible. And I don't know that there's much of an appetite among our elected officials to do it. If we think about the members of the US Congress right now, for example, it's the Democrats who are losing in the court 6-3 who believe that there are these major problems. The Republicans don't seem to be that concerned with the court. Similarly, you would need 3/4 of state legislatures across the country to get on board. And, given party polarization and the fact that so many of the states have unified party control, much of it under Republican control, it just doesn't seem likely. I wouldn't be surprised if Congress continues to try and pass legislation, to impose ethics guidelines that are enforced by an independent party. But that's probably as far as we're going to get.
We are less than 2 weeks. Today is Flag Day, June 14th. We are less than 2 weeks away from the first presidential debate on June 27th. What strategies are we going to see by the Trump camp and the Biden camp in setting up expectations for their candidates?
I mean, I think both sides, it's going to be a race to the bottom. Neither side wants you to have any expectations whatsoever, because I really think that this is sort of a trial balloon kind of debate. Donald Trump turned 78 today. If he wins, he will literally be the oldest president ever inaugurated. We talk about Joe Biden's age, but Donald Trump is right up there. And he will be older than Joe Biden was when he was inaugurated in 2021. Both of them are pretty out of shape when it comes to debating. They haven't done this in 4 years. And on top of that, both of them are dealing with personal trials and tribulations, whether it be the Hunter Biden situation for Joe Biden or Donald Trump's own, legal woes himself. So my bet is that both sides are going to try and put forward fiery arguments that make their bases excited about the election heading into the summer, and make them realize that the other person would be a disaster for democracy and for the country. But I don't expect any sort of nuanced policy discussion, and I certainly don't expect a gaffe-free debate.
So you make the important point that both of them are out of practice from a debate standpoint. Are either like sort of tapping into that Burgess Meredith trainer, A.E. Rocky, and they'll be donning those gray sweatsuits, running the streets of Washington or New York, go get 'em Rocky, running up the stairs of the Washington, the Lincoln Memorial, that type of imagery to get ready for this, constantly training on the heavy bag?
I mean, that's a way to ensure that neither of them makes it to June 27th. My bet is that Joe Biden and his team are practicing, and we're seeing it a little bit, I think, in terms of the speeches that he's been giving recently. Earlier this week, the same day that Hunter Biden was convicted, he gave a speech to a gun violence group that was quite powerful, quite compelling, and quite well delivered. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those lines that had received quite a bit of applause and excitement at that event make it into some of the lines that he's going to deliver at the debate. And Donald Trump has been, for the last several months, delivering on almost a daily basis, sound bites about how the system is rigged and, he needs to get in there and clean things up. So neither of them has debated recently, but I would expect that the kinds of words, rhetoric, and language that they've been using in other forums will make it into the debates. But my bet is that neither is sweatsuited up, neither is ready to go, and when the gloves come off, there's just going to be this deflating balloon.
Is the White House making a mistake in running Joe Biden all over the country and all over the world? He is caught more and more often looking exhausted, vacant in some situations, caught on video. He's now at the G7, I want to say, in Italy. He was just overseas, a week ago. He is just, this is not a 60-year-old president. This is an 80-year-old president. Are they making an error in just this constant motion?
Well, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place because they have to demonstrate that he has the wherewithal to do it and to be president for another 4 years. And he has to participate in these meetings. The United States is a global superpower. We need to be playing a role. We need to be present when the G7 meets, when there are important climate change discussions, when there are important discussions about the war in Ukraine. And so he has to be there. But the challenge with that is that it is exhausting. And frankly, it's exhausting for a 60-year-old president. It's exhausting for a 45-year-old president. They can just recover a lot faster. But, heading into the election, I think the campaign has ultimately made the decision that it's more important to demonstrate that he has the vitality and the ability to do the job rather than to sort of keep him secluded so that he has the energy when a reporter does catch him in the Rose Garden.
Yes, spacing out. What should we be looking at over these sort of next 2 weeks running up to the debate on June 27th?
Well, I think we saw the beginning of it yesterday, and this is a matter of, for the next couple of weeks, the vice presidential audition period. It's our version of American Idol, which we've never really seen before in such a clear way. I guess Donald Trump is going to make the big reveal at the convention on the 15th, which will be 4 days after he's sentenced. And we're seeing the Republicans in Congress get in line. Now, there were several of them, who wore matching Trump uniforms, Trump costumes, and supported him in New York. But when Donald Trump went to speak to the House and the Senate yesterday, there were only a handful of members who opted not to participate in that meeting. And even Mitch McConnell met with Donald Trump. There was a handshake, and McConnell has said he's on board for the election. And so, I think the Republican Party has basically come together. And although Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski are not on board, I don't think anybody cares. So I think over the course of the next 2 weeks, we'll see more, convergence among the Republicans and a continued jockeying for who gets that second slot.
You mentioned that July 11th, the president is sentenced in the New York case. July 15th is the Republican convention. Is there any indication that while on the phone with the probation officer, that Donald Trump offered the vice presidency to that probation officer in exchange for some more lenience and maybe, extra fries and things like that?
A page right out of the Rod Blagojevich handbook.
Yeah, that's correct.
My bet is no, but a girl can dream.
Last but not least, we're seeing a lot of disruption around the world. We're seeing, flash elections in France because of a growing conservative movement in that country. If the world is looking to America for leadership, whether it's financial leadership, military leadership, or moral leadership, is this presidential election between the 80-year-old, sometimes doddering Joe Biden and the 78-year-old Donald Trump, now convicted felon, is this a low point in American history on a global stage?
I don't think so. I actually think that this is one of the strictest juxtapositions of choices regarding supporting the rule of law or not, supporting democracy or not, embracing authoritarianism or not. And so Democrats might not be in love with their candidate, but there's no question that these two men are completely polar opposites when it comes to their views of what the government should be, how important democracy is, and the role that the United States should play in protecting it. So I actually think that the discussions that are going to come out of this presidential election have the potential to actually really elevate the United States. By the same token, if Donald Trump pulls off a win, then I think that sends shockwaves throughout the system about sort of the last democracy, the potential that we're the last democracy standing.
Jennifer Lawless, as always, thank you very much. For everybody else, stay tuned. Lots going on, even on this beautiful Friday. We'll have updates throughout the day. If you haven't seen this morning's big headlines, East Providence, a nearly 4% increase in taxes in juxtaposed to Providence and to Cranston with 0 tax increase. We dig in a little bit into that, but I think there's much more to that story. Everybody stay safe, enjoy this great weather.